Can I ask you also to switch mobile phones either off or to silent? And we understand that this is a meeting that raises certain emotions. We'd ask you to respect those around you and those members of the committee and refrain from booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. Before we move on to the business, can I just introduce the officers in front of me? First of all, Barry Devlin, our legal beagle, and then Chris French, a principal planning officer who's just joined the authority. Welcome, Chris. Peter Cleveland, head of development control, and particularly for those who haven't met her, those people in the west of the Borough, Jennifer Samuelson, the planning officer who's going to present the case tonight. So moving on to the main business. Item 1, the minutes of the meeting which took place on the 15th and one on the 24th of August have been on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content I sign those as a correct record of those meetings? Thank you. Gary, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we've received apologies from councillors Mike Band, Brian Ellis, David Else, Christian Hess, Chris Story, Jeanette Stennett and Stuart Stennett. We also appear to be missing Councillor Denis, Councillor Stephen Hill and Councillor Mulliner. Councillor Jim Edwards is here as a substitute.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Gary, members before the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we received one declaration of non-pecuniary interest from Councillor Mary Forozeski. This is due to the fact that in 2014 she was a member of the Cranley Parish Council Planning Committee and is still a member of Cranley Parish Council.
Thank you very much. And item 4, have there been any questions?
Anybody else?
Are there any other declarations of interest? Nope. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gary. Question, item 4. Have there been any questions from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. Item number 5, we move on to the planning application WA 2016-0517, land south of Amlets Lane and north of Roberts Way, Cranley. Jennifer, all yours to present the case, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just make a few words if that's okay. This application seeks approval of reserved matters following the outline approval of WA 2014-1038, which approved the principle of up to 125 dwellings on the application site. As such, the principle of development for housing has been approved and is not a matter to be considered this evening. The matters which members are being asked to consider are those which remain reserved at the outline stage, and this includes means of access, appearance, scale, landscaping and layout of the proposed development. I'll just touch on a couple of matters which are key important matters in Cranley and anywhere in the borough, but in terms of matter relating to drainage, at the outline stage, Thames Water concluded that there was not capacity in the network to accommodate the proposed development and required an impact study to be undertaken to determine how foul flows from the development could be drained and managed. Members accepted a Grampian-style condition, i.e. a condition preventing any development commencing until full details of on- and off-site foul drainage works had been agreed at the outline stage. This remains Thames Water's position, and you will note that their response to the reserved matters application requested the same conditions, and you'll see that in the consultation section of the report. However, these conditions remain on the outline permission, which must be read in conjunction with this application, and therefore the conditions have not been reapplied because they're already caught by the outline permission. The applicants are currently working with Thames Water to agree the improvements required, and of course they cannot commence any development until that's formally agreed and signed off on. In terms of surface water drainage, the lead local flood authority are satisfied that the requirements under the outline approval have been met and the surface water drainage strategy has been agreed, However, further detailed conditions have been applied, securing the final detailed drainage requirements and management requirements, which you will have noted within your agenda. As such, these matters, which are not to be considered in the determination of the application before you this evening. I just have one verbal update, and that is with regards to page 5 at the front of the report, to confirm that the site is located within the wards of Cranley East, which is referenced, and also Shamley Green and Cranley North, and that's just a verbal update. I'll now pass you over to Jennifer to take you through the detailed plans. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Peter. The application site is located to the south of Amlets Lane and to the north of Roberts Way, Summerlands and Copse Edge. The site currently comprises 5 fields which are divided by established trees and hedging. A footpath and stream run through the centre of the site from north to south, here. The site is surrounded to the south by residential development, to the east by 2 properties set within extensive grounds, to the west by a woodland wedge, and to the north and northwest by further fields and some residential dwellings. This plan here on the screen shows the proposed vehicular access point in red off Amlets Lane, with cycle and pedestrian access points shown in green and orange that link to the existing residential development to the south and fields to the west. The site slopes towards the stream in the centre, so it slopes in this direction and down in this direction, as well as down to the south here and to the west here. The site is enclosed by existing mature trees and hedging. This is the proposed site plan for a total of 125 dwellings. The layout has been designed in perimeter blocks with dwellings facing onto the road network and public amenity spaces, which would provide natural surveillance to these public spaces. In the southeast corner, here, the proposed design would include 2 bungalows that would be positioned opposite Copse Edge, which are these houses here, which are also bungalows. A section of the land levels and the relationship between the proposed and existing buildings shall be shown later in the presentation. The affordable housing is highlighted in yellow and blue. The blue represents social rented housing and the yellow represents shared ownership housing. The 2 apartment blocks, one of which is here and the other one in the corner here, would have a mix of shared ownership and social rented 1 and 2 bedroom flats. The affordable housing has been separated into small clusters throughout the site, which officers consider to be appropriate. The purple housing shown on the plans, which is here and here, would be custom build, which would provide 3 options for ground floor layout, which I'll show you later in the presentation. The proposed layout includes a large amount of public open space. A central belt of this space is in the middle here, which would include dry basins that form part of the sustainable drainage system. Further small areas of open space would be incorporated into the site, such as here and here. And to the south of the access point of Amlets Lane, there would be an area of undeveloped space that would be planted as woodland, which is shown here, which would obscure views of the development from Amlets Lane and help to retain the rural country character of the road and the AOMB to the north. A local area of play would be here, and a local equipped area of play is shown here. In accordance with the outline permission, a community orchard and allotment are in the western corner of the site, and the community hub building would be located here. This building is not under consideration this evening, as the details were conditioned on the outline permission under condition 43. These details have been agreed and are shown later in the presentation. I will run you through some photographs of the site now. So photograph A is from this point here looking across to the footpath in the central woodland belt, which is shown here. And photograph B looks up towards this dwelling here from where the allotments would be. These photographs look down towards Roberts Way from either side of this green belt here. These are the dwellings at Roberts Way. These photographs are taken from this point looking into the southwesternmost field. This photograph, photograph A, looks up the footpath along the central woodland belt and then a photograph looking back towards the housing at Roberts Way again, and the boundary of the site. These photographs are taken looking towards Summerlands here, and that's this development here, and then also just showing the bungalows at Copse Edge, which are set lower in level to the application site. And these photographs are looking into the site from the existing boundary. This area would be planted as woodland, and this is Amlet's Lane, and the proposed access would be approximately here. The existing access would be planted were permission to be granted under the landscaping scheme. This is the landscaping plan, which just further shows the woodland belt here, and also there would be a woodland buffer, an ecological buffer that runs around the edge of the site. So this is a section plan showing the relationship of the proposed bungalows to the existing bungalows of Copse Edge. The plan shows, this plan here shows that the distance of the rear elevation of the proposed bungalow to the site boundary would be 26 metres, and the distance between the rear elevation of this bungalow to the rear elevation of the existing bungalows would be 36 metres. These well exceed the guidance within the residential extensions SPD for overlooking, which are of 18 metres and 21 metres respectively. This plan shows the detailed access as well as the swept path analysis showing how the refuse vehicles will enter into the site, and the following two plans will just show how the refuse vehicles can manoeuvre throughout the site and access and exit safely. These street scenes show the variety in the proposed housing in terms of the height and the style. The exact details of the housing will be shown on elevation plans later in the presentation. However, the street scenes additionally show the relationship between the landscaping and the built form. So street scene A is taken from this point, looking into the site, and street scene B is here, looking towards the exit. These are further street scenes, just taken street scene C is here and D along here. You will note that some of the elevations I'll show you now are in watercolour, which just give further detail of the colouring. There are a mix of plans and watercolour dwellings on these slides. This is an example of the affordable terraced and semi-detached housing style. Throughout the site, the indicative materials of the proposed housing would be traditional to the Cranley area, to include red brick, tile hanging, and a mix of slate and clay tile roofing. Were permission to be granted, officers have recommended a condition be imposed to require further samples of materials to ensure that they are of a high quality. This shows examples of a one-bed and a two-bed bungalow. Throughout the development, chimneys would be a widespread feature, which is common to the character of Cranley, and further brick detailing would be included above the windows, as kind of shown here. This is an example of two of the three-bed detached market dwellings with strong entrance porches and bay windows with gable features above the windows, and a five-bed detached market dwellings. These are the custom-build dwellings, the front elevation shown here. The custom build would allow for three varieties of ground floor, which would have different kitchen and living room areas. So any future occupiers would have a choice between the three, this one and these two down here. These are just some examples of the proposed double and single bay garages with pitched roofs. There are two apartment buildings proposed within the development. The designs of these apartment buildings have changed significantly during the course of the application, following close correspondence with the council's design officer. These buildings would be 2.5 stories in height. Whilst it's recognised they would be of a greater scale and mass than other dwellings on the site, officers considered the multiple ridge heights, the land levels, and the variety in the detailing would reduce the perception of bulk and give a strong vertical rhythm to the buildings. And this is the second apartment building that's proposed. This is the community building, which was agreed under Condition 43 of the Outline Permission. The building would comprise 5 self-contained glass-sided offices for 2 to 3 persons, a boardroom here, and an open-plan workspace for members of the building. The hub expects a total membership of around 25 micro-businesses in addition to the occupants of the 5 offices. Before I move on to the determining issues, I refer members to the update sheet. Since the publication of the agenda, 2 additional representations were made raising objection to the scheme. The additional comments did not raise any additional material considerations to those addressed within the report. Turning to the determining issues, with regards to the matters of principal and technical opinion, the principle of development and surface water and foul drainage were discussed by Peter earlier. As shown earlier in the presentation, the proposal would provide a leap and a lap alongside further areas of open public amenity space. The design of the play spaces would accord with the Fields and Trust guidance and principles agreed at outline stage. Sorry. With regard to highway safety, the wide implications of the proposal on the existing highway network were determined at outline stage and therefore are not for consideration this evening. Conditions were imposed on the outline permission with regard to construction transport management plan of vehicle parking and turning and traffic calming measures. These, along with all other conditions imposed on the outline permission, would remain in force were permission to be granted this evening. The access was agreed at outline stage to be from Amulets Lane, and a condition on the outline permission secured this indicative location. Officers consider, following consultation with the County Highway Authority, that the proposed access would accord with that agreed at outline stage and would be acceptable in highway safety terms. With regard to parking provision, the proposal would well exceed the parking requirements of the Council's parking guidelines, and further, additional parking areas would be provided for the community orchard and allotments and the community hub. Members who came on the site visit will recall that tree protection measures have started to be put in place on the site. These have been agreed under Condition 13 of the outline permission. The majority of trees on the site are proposed to be retained, with the exception of the route of the proposed access road through the site. Further, tree protection orders have been served on all mature and healthy trees that are not proposed to be removed, which are additional to the existing tree protection orders on the site. The matters of planning judgment which councillors are asked to consider this evening are the landscaping, appearance, layout, scale, the design and impact on visual amenity, and the impact on residential amenity. Officers recommend that reserved matters be agreed, subject to the conditions and informatives set out on pages 59 to 67 of the agenda. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We now move to item of public speaking, so can I first introduce Liz Townsend?
Good evening, councillors. This site is of poor design. Please consider like-for-like blended housing along the site boundaries. Whilst consideration for damage to the abutting AONB is mentioned, there appears little similar consideration given to residents whose quality of life and homes will be negatively affected by this development. People living near the site are extremely worried and distressed. A blended approach would make a huge difference. We would ask you to consider, as with the Crest Nicholson site, removing permitted development rights in south-facing roofs along the southern boundary to protect residents' privacy. Instead of a rural outlook, residents have the prospect of dense housing and huge apartment blocks. The 11-metre, 3-storey flats are not a similar height to properties in the surrounding area and are on higher ground. The vast bulk and appearance of these flats is acknowledged in the report. However, we are not convinced that these substantial, out-of-character buildings at one of the highest points in Cranley have, and I quote, a strong vertical rhythm. and at night when lit up they will be even more prominent. This completely contradicts officers' statement that they are trying to retain a rural countryside feel to the development. Dwellings on the east and southeast are also to be built less than the recommended distance from the boundary, and whilst it's suggested that the trees provide some buffer now, this will not be the case in autumn and winter. Please take this into consideration. The promised 76% social rented has now been reduced to 50% and is unacceptable. Calla Homes bought this site with outline planning permission, knowing the agreed level of affordable housing provision. They should honour the letter and the spirit of this commitment. To ensure this housing is tenure blind, it should also be far more pepper potted across the development. The one access road from the site requires the vegetation to be kept down to 1.05 metres to ensure safe visibility splays. Who will guarantee that this will be maintained? Amlets is a busy, narrow lane with approximately 820 cars using this as a cut-through between 7 and 9 in the morning and is regularly blocked by HGVs. Residents have continuously flagged up safety issues on this road. We have still not had sight of the construction management plan, confirming how construction traffic is going to safely enter and leave this site. We are extremely relieved that the Grampian Agreement has not been removed. However, we continue to have grave concerns about the sewerage infrastructure and effluent discharge, and do not believe your responsibility to address water quality issues have been fulfilled. Your local plan scoping report for water quality states that Cranley Waters is currently failing in terms of water quality. This status can only worsen with more sewage. We would urge you to request sight of the detailed designs of the SUDs, which have still not been supplied. The drainage system and housing layout must work in tandem, and the scant hand-drawn sketch from Surrey County Council cannot provide enough reassurance to members that the scheme will be effective and prevent flooding elsewhere. Surrey recognises that Copse Edge is at risk of flooding and has now proposed a swale behind the bungalows. However, this does not appear to have been agreed, and the drainage evidence is not thorough enough for planning permission to be granted at this stage. There may not even be sufficient room at this point for the swale, taking into account the construction exclusion zone to protect boundary trees. Cranley has a rural heart. With members, please request a more sympathetic design and layout, along with low street lighting that is in keeping with the site that abuts the rural settlement and Surrey Hills AONB. And please be satisfied that water quality and sewerage has had the highest level of scrutiny before you grant this application. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to go over that.
Thank you. Councillor Bryant. You also have 4 minutes, sir.
Good evening, councillors. There are very many concerns locally to this development as presented: an absence of public transport options, with the nearest bus stop some considerable distance away. The walking time to the centre of the village is significant and uphill on the return journey, which will result in a reliance on car usage to get about. As such, as a minimum, the parking provision for all of the residents should adhere to Waverley's parking standards, including the 3-bedroom properties, and parking allocation should be adjacent to the dwellings in all cases. There is a single vehicular access from Amlets Lane. Amlets Lane is a dangerous, narrow rural lane which freezes in winter and at no point reaches the width of 5.5 metres, which is the minimum width required for 2 cars to pass safely at low speed. In the past few weeks, officers have been supplied with measurements of the lane from a very concerned resident. We cannot find a comment on the width of Amlets Lane from highways, other than a comment relating to the proposed width within the housing estate. We cannot see how construction traffic will safely use this lane without serious danger and inconvenience to residents. 2 heavy goods vehicles cannot pass one another. In terms of the mix of market dwellings, we believe that the original number of proposed 1- and 2-bedroom dwellings should be honoured and not reduced as proposed in this application. The self-build unit should also be honoured and not changed to custom build. The only letters received in support of the original application were from those living outside of Waverley who had received marketing literature offering self-build plots to buy. The deed of variation on this matter should be refused. Whilst the Parish Council appreciates the developer offering 40% affordable housing, the proposed tenure split allocation is significantly different from the one which helped secure the outline planning permission. Social housing should not be clustered predominantly in blocks of flats. No blocks of flats with 2.5 stories should be accepted. As a material consideration, the Cranley design statement is clear that, quote, the height of buildings should be sympathetic to its context, unquote. Buildings 11 metres high on the highest site in Cranley will be detrimental to the visual amenity of existing residents and will urbanise this largely rural edge of the village location which borders Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. Now bungalows with a former rural aspect will be overlooked from a more elevated position by blocks of flats. Whilst we are pleased to see the enforcement of Condition 40 on sewage, the two proposed sewage pumping stations located within the site must not rely on mobile signal or electricity. Power cuts are increasingly frequent, the most recent being this year on 22nd of June, 17th of August, 28th of August, and even 2 power cuts yesterday. The mobile phone signal is very poor. Finally, please gain clarity and most importantly surety on the upkeep of the public spaces. Responsibility should not fall back on the local Waverley taxpayer. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bryant. I now turn to Mr. Gary Worsfold. Should you need a little over the 4 minutes, Ms. Worsfold, you're welcome to take another 20 seconds.
Chairman and members of the Planning Control Committee, good evening. My name is Gary Worsfold of Scott Worsfold Chartered Architects. Before I throw myself into my written words, I think that the previous speakers deserve a response, and that's only true and correct. Responding to Ms. Townsend, like-for-like blended housing along the boundaries, it very much is, and in fact we worked very hard meeting with local residents, changing the design so that bungalows backed onto bungalows, at 2-storey backed onto 2-storey, although particular points being made of the flats. Flats are a very desirable component of affordable housing provision. They meet the need, they're very worthy, and we have them as 2.5 stories. The 11 metres that they've quoted are to the maximum ridge point of one particular component of the building from a lower ground level. The ground levels change, but the perception will be of a 2-storey building with dormer windows, not dissimilar, not unusual, and quite comparative with much built form in the area. Regarding affordable provision, it's completely compliant with your policy, and the affordable is clearly pepper potted. Visibility displays will be maintained throughout, and road safety is obviously a critical point and managed by your own authority. Moving to a point that the Councillor Grant made, the minimum width for 2 vehicles to pass on an adopted highway is actually 4.8 metres and not 5.5, and that's covered by Design Bulletin number 32. Moving to my own words, the design comes to you after outline consent was given in 2014, and this submission is the Reserved Matters application. The reserved matters which are now before you are layout, scale, appearance and landscaping and access. All drainage matters are covered by granting condition. The detailed design before you is exceptionally thorough. Excuse me, Chairman, this is and covers all aspects of urban design, architecture, landscaping, ecology and highways design and arboriculture. It has evolved with close liaison with your planning officers and all of your authorities experts, as well as local residents and those living near to the site. Indeed, the layout was amended during the application process and following a meeting with adjacent residents.
Chairman, can I interrupt there? Can you just sit back away from the mic? You're spitting into the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can't hear how you sound to, you know. So, yeah. The total number of dwellings is 125. This equates to an overall density of just 9.6 dwellings per hectare. The scheme is very low density when compared with most new housing proposals, which would typically have a density that's in the order of 3 times this. However, that which is submitted is purposefully an exceptionally low density, and 125 units is and always has been the plan, and a plan which can create an exceptionally landscape-rich place. The mix offers a full range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. A detail of both the private and affordable mix is helpfully given in your officer's report. Green space dominates, as do the existing trees, which encapsulate and create the pockets of place, which are experienced as a serendipitous event and as each part is travelled and experienced. It is interesting to note that 4.8 hectares is planned as public open landscape space, and this includes for a leap and a lap. This is an exceptionally high provision and does not include private gardens or any area that is not publicly accessible. Along with new family homes and much needed affordable homes, the design includes for allotments, a public orchard, a new community building, significant public open space, ecological enhancements, all important existing trees and new and enhanced existing paths which connect to pedestrian routes to the south, east and west. The garden areas for all and private amenity is also very high, with well-sized family gardens exceeding what would typically be expected in new housing schemes. The architecture reflects the materials and scale of the vicinity, and your officers have asked that we include special details and elements which truly reflect Cranley, the Surrey vernacular, and the special place that this, our submission, can become a part of. The design before you is special and are rich in landscape architecture and a sense of place and community. It has passed through considerable critique and a team effort working with your authority. The result is a scheme we are all very proud of, and the recommendation to you to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Worsfold. Before I open it, just a matter that the officers didn't mention. On the site visit, we noticed the overhead power lines. They, in fact, will be buried for the development. And also, just make the point that the lead local flood authority and Thames Water have already got the conditions under the outline planning permission. So that's something else to think about. And the density of the housing development is quite remarkably low. Look at my own area where we have 54 per hectare. I think this is around about 11 per hectare. It's very much the country border. Members, down to you. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chairman. Two real issues here, in my opinion. One I picked up on Monday, and that's the bungalows in the down in the corner here. Yeah, and the loss of amenity for those bungalows. I know we talked about planting a hedge and some trees, etc., but that would make those bungalows much darker. They're quite close, so there is loss of amenity there. But the other key issue, which I think we really need to look at, are the flats. You know, in a rural community like this, I don't understand why we have to have 2.5-story buildings. I just don't. I mean, I don't understand it. I mean, I can appreciate that you want to squeeze as much out of it as you can and keep the gardens to a good size, which is what's happened. I mean, this is a very nice development, and you know, people will want to live there, but you know, the scale of those apartments, you know. I'd like to see the setting, actually, because it does look big compared to all the other parts of the development. It's a great shame. So I'm not happy about this.
Thank you, Councillor Foreski.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, officers, for your report. And I'd just like to say thanks to the speakers as well. With your indulgence, please, may I reiterate what I and many other people in Cranley believe in, and that we are not anti-development, and we recognise the need for housing, not market housing, but affordable housing, built on appropriate sites. Amlets Lane is not an appropriate site. Amlets Lane was the first of the strategic greenfields to come forward to be granted outline permission. At the time, going back to 2014, 9 of the 23 members of the JPC were absent. We're not rating too much better this evening. The vote marginal, that's not very democratic. This application does not demonstrate a good use of the land. This application in outline, if it came before members today, it's unlikely it would be granted permission. And now, like a bullet to our heads, we're told that the council has, now that they've approved their draft local plan, the council has approved their draft local plan, part 1, significant weight can be given to the local plan progressing. In determining the application before us, note must be taken of the significant material changes in the reserved matters application before us. And here's just a few. The report claims on page 7 that vehicular access onto the site is gained from a number of points on Amlets Lane and Roberts Way. That is factually incorrect, unless I have read it wrong. Members who were present at the original site visit in 2014 met at Roberts Way. I wonder if we can just go to the map of the site, please, so we can demonstrate the difference between where we met last time to where we met this time, because where we met last time is in a high-density location right down the bottom here, as opposed to the green fields up the top of Amlets Lane. So the actual entrance and exit is on Amlets Lane. Amlets Lane is a rural road incapable of 2 lorries passing side by side. Grit lorries will have to use the middle of the road. Passing places are private drives. There's no footpaths. It's remote from the village settlement. It's a rat run. And in 2014, the site visit was misleading because it didn't show the true extent of that particular road. On the site visit this time, members parked on site on a temporary surface because it's unsafe to park on the road. St Joseph's School and College, St Joseph's Sixth Form School and College for children with unique and special needs exit directly onto Amlets Lane, just yards from the proposed new entrance. That also appears to have moved slightly since the 2014 application. Another point. I understand ownership of this site has been transferred, I don't know how many times, but it has transferred ownership since permission for outline was granted in 2014. A number of variations to the 2014 conditions have been put forward since. Market dwellings now proposed differ from 2014. The 2014 app includes 15 self-build. I believe we've got a register now for self-build. They're to be replaced with custom-built scheme in this particular application. And the tenure split has changed. The layout, scale, appearance, landscape, access have all changed. Cumulatively demonstrates there are material, significant changes from the 24 application. My greatest fears are those for the residents surrounding this site, especially those on Copse Edge, and the wider areas including downstream to Summerlands and the impact on their residential amenity. For example, and I would like to go, please, to a picture where it shows the Copse Edge and the bungalow roof. Yeah, there we are. For example, on the best part of 6 foot, so someone standing at the rear other side of one of those bungalows at Copse Edge, their head would almost be level with the first brick on the ground of Amlets Lane site. It is very, the gradient is really not proportional to what you see there. What should have been included in the site visit was actually a site visit to Copse Edge, and you'd see exactly what I meant. The new layout includes a car park right behind the gardens of the elderly residents. So if I can now draw your attention down to Copse Edge, please, where the 4 bungalows who I believe are most affected here. If we can go down there, please. If we can go to that. So what you'll see there is the new layout includes a car park, a large car park. There we are, just there. It's right behind the gardens of the elderly residents who have made Copse Edge their retirement place. They now face the prospect of noise, disturbance and overlooking. Density, yes, absolutely right, the great density. So having got that level of density, We can, in this case here, I believe, look at allowing space to be looked at further onto the site to relocate 21, 22, 23, 28, 27 and 26 and the car park away from Copse Edge and giving those residents there the peaceful retirement they so deserve. I tell you what now, members, and I'm sorry, I'm going to rant. I make no apologies for caring passionately and desperately about the impact on this development we have. The gentleman who spoke last, whilst I appreciate everything he said, and I will give credit to Carla for making progress in and talking to residents. You don't really know the area very well. These are the same applicants who thought we had a railway station in Cranley, which we don't, but yet it was deemed that that's how their workers were going to get to the site. We actually don't have a railway station. If you look at the site, the properties don't blend. There's multi-million pound properties on the Amlet side. So, you know, we're saying these are going to be multi-million pound properties. We've sacrificed one of the most beautiful greenfield sites in exchange for a reserved matters application that does not go far enough to protect the existing residents that differ greatly from the surrounding area and the Cranley design statement. These are material differences in this application, compounded by the cumulative effect, infrastructure, flooding, biodiversity, sewerage, health and well-being, crime and disorder. The principle of development has been established, but we don't have to accept or approve design that does not fit, design that is not in keeping, and design geared towards new residents but does not blend with the existing. The significant change to the immediate area and its effect will detract away from the local area, and the harm it will cause will far outweigh any need for or any benefit. We will have all received the plans, and I'm sure we've all had the covering letter that accompanies them, and there are some very nice designs in there. What it doesn't show us is designs of the apartments of the flats, the 2.5-storey apartment flats that are going to be put on site, which are totally and completely out of keeping. More is left without explanation. The orchard, the allotments, the office hub, the buildings, who's going to pay and manage those facilities? I know at one stage it was talked about negotiations with the parish council, but I don't think it's fair that the parish council should take on something of this nature, but that's for the parish council to decide. The viability of this scheme is not the responsibility of Waverley, but for the developer to deliver a first-class, clear, creative, visionary scheme, not an afterthought on how savings can be made through amendments, and to shy away from plugging into the sewerage network by trying to build before ensuring new homes can flush their loos. I accept and I appreciate the effort of Carla Holmes to work with the residents and come up with a design that in part is acceptable. But in my opinion, it's still not good enough. It is a matter of judgment that each member can make here tonight, and on balance, given the harm to residents, I cannot support the scheme in its current format. Therefore, I cannot support the officer's recommendation. But I would, however, because we know that the scheme's got outline planning permission, but I would support a deferral because the people on Amlets Lane and Copse Edge are open to further discussions. We've identified this evening that there is a density there that more planning, better planning can make everybody happy, and I think there's an opportunity there to actually look at that in more detail by deferring and asking Carla Holmes. We're not saying we're going to object to your application or anything like that. We're just saying, please, 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 come back with an application that justifies this most beautiful, stunning part of North Cranley and Waverley, that we can, please don't destroy it, come back with something better. And I look forward to either a seconder on my proposal or what my fellow councillors have to say. Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence.
You are proposing a deferral. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Edwards?
Sorry, Chairman. I think we need to hear the rest of the arguments before coming to the, before we come to the proposal, because there may be other proposals that people want to make. So can we have the discussion first and then come back to the proposal, please? Is that possible? Is that right?
Certainly. We haven't got a seconder at the moment, so we will continue with the debate. Sorry, Councillor William? Can you use the microphone, please, for the webcast? Thank you.
I am happy to second the proposal.
Right, so we have a proposer and a seconder. We speak to that deferral situation at this time. Members? Councillor Coburn.
Well, as Councillor Williams just beat me to seconding, for very much the same reason that people have raised this evening. It's a bit like the last JPC, we sort of went round in circles, but what we're all basically saying is we accept the principle of development on this site, we accept it's a very large site, we don't want it developed. Those of us who weren't on the JPC last time could have wept at the site visit, but we are where we are. And I think what we all feel is the apartment blocks are inappropriate, full stop, quite frankly. I can't imagine that you could have an appropriate apartment block here. There is space. I don't know whether you need all that allotment space in the community building. I know the community building is part of the outline planning application, but I think there is space, I think there is scope to make this better. And if a deferral can do that, can remove the elements that really are just not a part of Cranley to most of us that know it well, protect the amenity. And I think this is something that came out at the last JPC, that we should really start with the existing residents when we're looking at these greenfield developments and protect them as much as we can, and then look at the sort of virgin greenfields, as it were. But we seem to do it in a slightly backwards fashion at the moment. So, you know, if we can genuinely get something better on this site with a short deferral, then I would certainly support it.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. It's really been for me a sort of unbalanced thing about a deferral. But the more I think of it, the more I think that we should. And the word Councillor Coburn used was short deferral, so that we can get some of the base things right. I don't see the point, and maybe I've missed something, of this community hub with office space and a boardroom, and it seems totally out of keeping to me. This is a housing development, and there is space around it to do things. I dislike intensely the 2.5-storey apartment blocks. When they came up on the screen, they look like something out of an Addams Family film. You know, I mean, they just, and yet we've got some lovely drawings here of the other homes on the development, which look really very nice. So I don't think there's a lot that we're asking to be changed, but there are some key things. I don't know what the purpose of the community hub, I think it's called, with the office space in a housing development, what the purpose of that is. I think there is a point to do with moving the car park away from those bungalows at Copse End, is it, or Edge? Yeah, I can't remember. Copse Edge. So I think there are a couple of things that we need to look at. And as for those 2.5-storey apartment blocks, they just look bizarre. So I was supported short deferral.
Thank you, Councillor Frost. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I certainly endorse the comments of Councillor Foraszewski to say that this is a unique opportunity. It is a unique opportunity, and we should aim to get the best for the residents and people of Cranley. There's many fine features looking at this. It's quite attractive, the density and other things, but I think there are some areas of concerns. I would express the concern about the flats. I'm sure in the right setting, they're, and I may disagree with some of my councillors, they're a fine building. I have concerns where they're located. I have concerns of their prominence, and I think that really needs looking at. On the site visit, I think that we all expressed concerns down amongst the bungalows. I think that the tree, Councillor Edwards talked about the trees growing up in light. I think the way that the light and the sun does go round there, it's not necessarily a particular problem, but how long will it take for that screening to come in? Is it appropriate to have the car parking there? Have we really thought hard enough about what that part of the site needs to be done? It seems to me that there's been some attempt to mitigate the issue of those bungalows, but perhaps they should look at option 3, 4 and 5 as well and consider if there's something better. I like the community hub. I think it's excellent. But if it's not appropriate and if it's not endorsed by the parish council, I think it shouldn't. It's something that may be a white elephant there. I do believe that something like that, a community building, should be endorsed by the parish council, whether or not they take responsibility for it. It's not going to work unless the people locally think it's going to be useful, and there may be other opportunities to use that particular space on the site, perhaps to move some of the car parking or to level out some of the flats. And I would certainly endorse a short deferral.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think they're missing a trick by just having 3 options of self-built homes. They should leave it open. I've sat on the Neighbourhood Plan Housing Committee for over 2 years, and the evidence is overwhelming that people would like to downsize, but they do not want to live in a shoebox. They want to downsize to something decent. They don't want to have to go outside to change their minds. They want a decent home that they can downsize to. So they should leave these options for the people to design their own homes and use these sites for that purpose.
Thank you. Peter Cleveland, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think there's been a number of points raised. I'll start with the flats because they seem to be the recurring theme across most of the comments. When they initially came in, we weren't satisfied with the design, and we worked closely with the council's own in-house design officer and the applicants to come to a scheme that, from the professional advice from our in-house design officer, was considered to be acceptable. I appreciate it's a judgment for you, but this sits to the southern part of the site, which does border the existing development. So it is appropriate that they are down that end because they're not on the northern end of the site, which is the end that moves towards the countryside. So principal hierarchy, we consider that's appropriate. They have introduced quite a number of design features. That's the bigger of the 2 buildings, and that sits in the southwest corner. And this is the other building that sort of sits centrally by the public footpath. So this one is obviously a lot reduced, and that actually appears as a 2-storey structure. So if we're looking at them, it's the apartment building 2, which I'll just roll back to. Oh, sorry. Is the 2.5 stories. So it's, as appearance, it's that one that appears like that. And it is of a 2.5 story building. There's change in heights, there's visual interest in it, but obviously it's your view to take a point on the scale, but it has been supported by the council's design officer. In terms of the relationship with Copse Edge, I'll take you back again to this section plan and the distances involved. Sorry, bear with me 1 minute. So distances you've got here, you talked about potential options, and we saw about 4 or 5 potential sketch options from the applicants before we agreed on this detailed design, and this worked appropriately. Obviously, you've got a parking court. It's not a car, it's a car parking area, but it's a parking court to serve sort of 3 or 6 properties here. It's a small area. It's landscaped. It's not a significant area of hard standing, and there's a significant buffer around properties. You've also got a distance, these 2 lines, the one on the right is 26 metres to the boundary, and you'll see that on the side elevation you've got the boundary wall, then this sort of ecological enhancement area as a woodland buffer and planting area, then the boundary of the residence. This is a buffer, this is not openly accessible area for residents using this property. They'd have their own garden. But taking a view, standing on the site, you look at the roof of that property. This is a sort of, from here, taking a measurement from that wall down is about a 3 metre difference. So there's clearly a height difference. So you're not going to get any intervisibility between properties. And also at 26 metres just to the boundary, 36 metres rear elevation to rear elevation, far is in excess of our adopted guidelines in terms of principal distance to windows. And my personal view is you wouldn't get an improved distance and relationship between a property where you've got a new development backing onto a residential property. So that's my view. You've obviously got these properties here, but they are, again, set further away from the boundary and far in excess of what our guidelines are. So we have worked closely to try and get what the right solution is for that area, and officers think that is the correct approach. In terms of the office hub, there's been various comments on that. They have to deliver that. That was agreed by the Outline Planning Permission when this permission was approved. It's a requirement for the Section 106 for the developers to do it. If they weren't, they would be going against the obligation of the permission. They've put a very detailed viability statement together to show how it would be delivered, and that has been agreed to discharge the condition, and that is to be managed by privately, and they've also done viability work to say how that can be delivered, and that is to serve residents or any other businesses' uses there. But they do have to require that. It's not something we can, well, we could tell them to go away and get rid of it, but at the moment, the planning committee decided on the application that that was part of what their proposal and made up the scheme. In terms of the affordable housing provision, there was comments on that as well. I don't think that was subject to the deferral, but there has been a change from the 70-30 split was the previous position. Members will be aware, I don't remember the specific date off the top of my head, 1% reduction in rental for affordable units, and that has a significant impact on the viability of delivering. And as you'll see now, as schemes come forward and as they're amended, you get a 50-50 split, because otherwise you won't get them delivered and they're not appropriate to deliver. So we have accepted that, but that's accepted based on the, actually providing and delivering on those points. I think that picks up on... the orchards and allotments, that's the only other point I will make. Again, that is to be managed by a private management company. Carlo are proposing to offer them to the smaller units on site as a first-come, first-serve, then potential community groups for its use, and then open to wider public. But that is their proposed approach, and they intend to manage and maintain them as part of the management requirement. As with all the other open space and the buffers and the visibility displays will be their responsibility to maintain as well. Hopefully that picks up on comments and provides. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. I was going to say, just to add to that, it's the last budget that changed the financials for the housing associations, where rental and shared ownership became a 50-50 split to go down the right road. Councillor Edwards, you want to talk to deferral?
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman. Just to go back to the 2.5 story apartment block, can we get that up on the screen again? Yeah, no, it's not where it is. Yeah, I want the elevations, please. Yeah. Okay. Right. If we look at the north elevation, okay, there's a top window there on the right hand side. It's a Velux window, I should think. That's 3-story. Has to be 3-story. It can't be 2.5 stories. 3-story. I mean, you know, if you look at the left hand edge of that elevation, it's quite clear. So you may say it's 2.5, but it's 3-story, and it's inappropriate. I'm sorry.
Councillor Coburn.
Just ask a very simple question. Am I the only person who finds these parking bays, which we see, or mini car parks all over these greenfield developments that we're seeing, inappropriate? I understand in a high-density situation they can be very effective, and we've got examples in Farnham where you have some high-density small properties and the cars go sort of elsewhere. But if you're building here, on that the previous picture we had, you've got some two lots of dwellings of the same size, one that's incorporating the car in front by the look of the picture, and the other one that has this mini car park which is, you know, going to affect the amenity of the residents in the existing bungalows. And I just find it as a design a very poor design. I can't understand why anyone would want to do a very small car park, rather than when you, that's what I said last time, you've got a space here, a green space. We should be aiming for perfection here, and the car should somehow get subsumed into the development of the houses. It shouldn't be something that you have to put on, you know, awful. We know what happens to car parks, basically. They end up looking a mess. They're the bit of developments that are not the bits that anyone wants to look at. But if the car is incorporated into the housing as much as possible, then it becomes a space that's maintained. So I think we're starting, to me, we're going to create problems before we need to with some of the designs that are coming into us. And we should be saying as an authority, we don't accept this. You know, what we want is if we're having to use these sites, what we want is something that really merges into the site but provides a good quality amenity space in every sense for every resident. And I just don't think this does. There's too much second-class thought here as far as I'm concerned. It's not good enough, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Councillor Holder.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with a lot of what my fellow councillors have said, and I cannot understand why the height of the affordable block is 11 metres high, whilst the height of all the market houses is 9.5 metres high. Why is it necessary to put the extra to have these huge apartment blocks? I agree that I think we should go away, or the proposer should go away and rethink the affordable housing apartment blocks. I think they're just too big and too massive, and they should be redesigned. And I would agree with the fellow that I prefer with a referral, a short referral. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest, do you want to come back to sum up before we move to a vote?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues for listening to what I had to say and for coming up with some very valid points to endorse why a deferral is absolutely of paramount. Cranley's already got 2 lots of allotments centrally based within the village itself, which are fully occupied. We have very few people on the waiting list. The entrance and exit onto Amlets Lane is on Amlets Lane, which makes it a remote site to access any facilities on there unless you're going by foot from, and I don't think you're going to go from foot to the allotments from Roberts Way. Councillor Carol Coburn, I always trust her good judgment and wisdom in talking common sense when she talks about small car parks and what they'll attract. This is going to be an estate where you'll have young families who will have children who will want to play basketball and football and stuff of a nature, because that's the nature of children. That car parking area just behind Copse Edge there is the perfect little tucked out of the way, nice little play area for some children who want to create noise and disturbance. I just reiterate what I said. There's a lot of good in this scheme. There's a lot of good that can come forward. This is a site that's exception to policy because it's a green field. To say that it's acceptable to put 2.5, 3-storey apartment flats on there, which is totally out of keeping. Even if you look at Roberts Way, it's totally out of keeping with what's around it. It's completely bonkers, quite frankly. I go back to what I said before. We have a real opportunity here. If we're going to give our beautiful green fields to a developer, then I think it is our responsibility to send out a very strong, clear message that we expect the very best back in return. And this particular green field will be possibly the first to be developed. So I think, again, the developer has got an opportunity here to set the standard. I don't think we should be settling for second best. And my final plea would be for those residents. I know them well, and I know that some of them wouldn't come here this evening because they are tired, sick, frustrated, fretful of their futures because of what is about to happen here this evening. So I suggest the deferral is the best option going forward so as we protect the neighbours and the residents and get the very best out of this most beautiful site. Thank you, Chairman and members, for listening to me.
Thank you. Turn to Councillor Adams, sorry. Didn't see his...
Thank you, Chairman. I think, as many people have recognised, 98% of this site is beautifully designed. Yeah. The density is fantastic. I mean, you only have to look at the houses immediately to the south, and you can see that, you know, there's 3 or 4 houses there in the space of the one house opposite. So it's not as if there isn't a good allocation of space. I think it's excellent. I bow to Councillor Coburn's experience of small car parks in Farnham. Our problem is we don't have enough in Tilford for the many visitors we get. I understand the sentiments about the flats. I'm sure that the developer could come up with a new design which wasn't quite so prominent, and maybe spread them out a bit over a larger area. Because again, there's a fair amount of space around it. I see that there is some flood prevention ponds around, but that doesn't, I wouldn't think, require a lot of ingenuity to sort that out. I think, yes, undoubtedly the most difficult issue is the 4 or 5 bungalows to the southeast. But it seems to me, with the design, with the gradient of the land, there's always going to be an issue there, whatever you do. I mean, you could, in fact, raise, I suppose, the ground immediately behind the bungalows so that the houses in the new development looked right over them and didn't actually have any chance of oversight. But I think the planned screening actually will work very well there. The gardens of those bungalows look northwest, so it's not as if they get a lot of sun a lot of the time. Most of the sun they get in the morning and during the day. So I don't see that that makes a lot of difference. And we're talking about, what, 4 or 5 properties there. So the flats, I can understand the reason for a deferral to talk about the flats, and I can understand a reason for deferral for talking about these mini car parks. And if the developer can come up with a better solution for the 5 properties along the southeast boundary, then all the better. But I don't see that much can be done about it. The properties on the field, as it is at the moment, are already quite a distance away. So I would leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. I, in fact, stood on the ground where the back door of the bungalows would be. I could see the ridge height of the bungalow and the 2 tiles on Copse Way. I could see nothing else of the house. So, you know, probably the top 18 inches in old money, half a metre of the house. That was that. I just wonder, you know, Councillor Forescu said, do we need allotments? Maybe that's where we can spread a few of the affordable homes. I don't know, but it's worth a thought. Can I ask for a final word from the officers, see if we have enough information or our feelings on car parking, 2.5 come 3-storey buildings?
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've made my comment on that, so I'll come back to you when you've taken a view on the deferral.
Fine. Can we move then, please, to the vote for deferral for a short period of time? Those in favour of a deferral, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Those against? Abstentions?
1.
Okay, so deferral is granted. There's no further business this evening, so... Oh, sorry. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, if I may, I'll just confirm the 2 points before we go away, and I'll also ask a question to members if that's okay. So the deferral is on 2 points, is on the scale of the flats and the 2.5 storey. and to look at reducing or removing that sort of parking court which sits in this southeast east corner. So are they the specific 2 points you want us to look at? And also, in terms of the scale of the flats, I'd ask members just to express how their view, in terms of delivering one-bed units which are required, how they would express that they felt they should be delivered and be built into the design of the site. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Frost.
Thank you very much indeed. As far as how they're going to be delivered is concerned, that is for the developer to actually work out how it's going to be done. All we're saying is we do not think it's appropriate for a 2.5-storey building, 2 of them, or one's a 3-storey, in that particular location. How the developer then decides to deliver the 1-bedroom is entirely a problem for the developer. And developers can do these things, But for me, it's not just the 2.5 and 3-storey, it is the design of them. I think the actual design of those blocks of flats I find particularly appalling.
Councillor Coburn.
Because I think the office is just trying to simplify it too much. It's a much deeper thing we're saying, basically. I think we're saying anyway. We're not saying remove that bit of car parking, change the flats and we're happy. We're saying, is that sort of development at all acceptable on this side? And you can produce high-density, low-level housing. It doesn't have to be 2.5, 3-storey flats to get high density. Be creative. Think about what you're going to do with these things. There are good examples all the way across the borough of high density, but not offensive large blocks of flats. And the reason I don't like the car park is not because I don't like the car park, therefore rub it out and put it somewhere else. It's the whole principle of how we're dealing with cars in our new developments. And we should not be building inappropriate developments where we can't fit the car neatly into the housing so that the street scene is protected. So we have to put these ugly little parking spaces. That's the point. It's bad design. It's bad design for all sorts of reasons. And quite frankly, going on what Mary Foraszewski said, we've got an opportunity here to do something that is good design. We like a lot of this, but it's no good just saying that we don't like the flats, therefore make them smaller, or we don't like the car park, therefore move it or rub it out. Think about why we don't like it, because that's the way you're going to get an improvement in design. It needs a bit more thought. It doesn't just need an eraser.
Didn't we make exactly the same points at our last JPC? Councillor Anne James.
Thank you, Chairman. I think what I feel is that it was the word, we're looking at blocks of flats. Nobody's objecting to flats. A 5-bedroomed house could have 4 1-bedroom flats or a studio apartment, but it isn't a block. And it's a very simple answer. It shouldn't be urbanised. It's a rural site. Those blocks of flats would look fine in the centre of Godalming on Flambard's Way or something, but they're not appropriate for a greenfield site. It just make a 5-bedroomed house into 4 1-bedroom studios.
Fine. I think we're just about there, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Those additional comments are helpful, and that's sort of what I was after. Maybe it's the way I framed the question, but thank you.
So, members, no further business. I thank you very much indeed.